Good morning. I want to talk about trauma today, especially traumas that happen to us in our childhood. We all have trauma of varying degree. When I was a child, I'll talk a little bit about some of my traumas. Um, my mother was very ill, and back in the day, nobody really talked about it. They didn't talk to the kids about what was going on with the parents. So I lived in a lot of fear because I thought my mother was dying. I knew it was serious. I was probably 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. And um, I knew that people were bringing food to us, that my mother wasn't around. There was a lot of underlying fear there. She ultimately survived. She had cancer and she ultimately did survive it. But she went through a lot of trauma with that. And of course, I went through a lot of trauma and fear. Um, I that was one of my traumas. I'll go talk about a little more later. But another trauma when I was 10 was witnessing a horrific accident that almost killed my brother. One of the things that happened during that experience was I witnessed the experience. So I kind of went into shock and I was traumatized and ran into my bedroom and was crying, and I didn't tell my parents what had happened. So I felt a lot of guilt over that. It wouldn't have changed the ultimate outcome, and he did survive, but it wouldn't have, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. And I felt a lot of guilt over that. Guilt that maybe I could have, if I just ran to my parents and said, this is what happened, maybe I would have helped him more. And that's not true. I couldn't have done anything. And I was 10 years old. I didn't know what to do. I knew that my mom would freak out, so I didn't want to tell her, and I was scared. And I don't think I knew my dad was home. So, and I was in shock and I didn't know how to handle it. And later, as he was recovering, I remember thinking, this isn't right. And into adulthood also, I carried that trauma with me because I felt guilty, but also because I felt, well, it wasn't my trauma. I'm not the one who got hurt. I'm not the one who almost died. I didn't suffer. So I kind of put it on the back burner and felt like I didn't have a right to feel bad about it or to feel traumatized in some way, or I didn't have a right to my feelings. And that's not true. Witnessing something really frightening and horrific is a trauma. And I realize that now. So once I addressed that, I was able to kind of forgive myself and let that go, and realize that let go of the guilt and understand that I had every right to my feelings. Another trauma that I experienced as I was older, I was no longer a child, but I went through a Category 5 hurricane on a small island. I had moved there, and it was my dream to start a life there. So right after I arrived, the hurricane came through, and it was extremely devastating, extremely traumatizing. It was, it's not something that's over instantly. It's something a hurricane goes through very slowly, and it was extremely large. So it took hours and hours and hours and hours, all day, all night, to pass through. winds up to 175 miles an hour. I won't get into details about the hurricane because that's another video or many more videos of stories. But what I didn't realize was that was a trauma. I just thought, well, wow, I'm lucky that I didn't lose my home, or I'm lucky I survived, and so many people have it so much worse. The fear that I withstood throughout the day and then the evening and throughout that night was so constant and such high tension, and not knowing if the roof was going to blow off, and not knowing what was gone outside, just knowing that it sounded like I was standing next to a jet, and I was hearing things hit the roof, and I was hearing things fly around, and I couldn't see anything. So and then afterwards, not knowing, I said I wasn't going to talk too much about the hurricane, but not having water, not having access to water, not having food, not having any services, basically. No access to any money. Back then, when I went through this, there wasn't any debit, there wasn't a lot of services that you have today. My money was in the bank was closed, shut down, damaged. Lines were down, you couldn't use a credit card. A lot of people, there was so much damage, there was no restaurants open, no grocery stores were open, things like that. At any rate, I'll stop talking about the hurricane now, but I remember this was my dream, and I ended up getting a job that involved boats, and because of the hurricane, the boats were all damaged, and so that job was out the window. So I had moved here, changed my whole life, and decided this was my dream, and I was going to live on this island in paradise, and I was going to work on these boats, and within a matter of hours and days, that dream was shattered. And also going through the fear for so long, what ended up happening after I came back, because I did leave, went back to where I lived before that, not realizing that I was traumatized there. And one of the first things that someone said to me when I got back was, "Oh, couldn't handle it, huh?" And that cut deep, because they had no inkling on any level of what I had just gone through. And not going through it, they couldn't. I didn't understand what it was like to go through a hurricane. I had no idea what I was in for when that happened. So what I want to say about that is, don't let anyone else decide the level of your trauma. You decide what the level of your trauma is. You decide. Don't let anybody else undermine that. Don't try to handle it on your own. I did for years. And I can tell you what happened to me after the hurricane when I tried to rebuild my life was that I started having panic attacks. I had extreme anxiety. For probably about 8 months to a year, I suffered from agoraphobia. I came back and I had a really great job. I ended up with the agoraphobia, not able to leave my house. I had paychecks piling up that I had piled up that I wasn't able to cash, because back then that was before you were paid through direct deposit or debit and all of that. So I had to go to the bank. I couldn't make it to the bank. It was too far. I could only make it across the street. And that's as far as I could go. So, and I never experienced anything like that before. So I ended up having to quit that job too, because not only could I not cash the checks, but I couldn't go to the job. It was too far. I was too fearful. Didn't know what was going on, why this was happening to me. Didn't associate it with the trauma I'd just been through. And I, of course, felt like a failure. So this created job loss. This created financial problems. I ended up drinking to excess to block things out, because I was trying to handle it on my own. I was always a really strong person, and I was successful, and I didn't understand what was happening. And I blamed myself, and I hadn't dealt with the fear and the trauma. I hadn't talked to anybody about it. I was trying to handle it on my own. So, you know, my whole life had been shattered. My dreams were shattered. So I also started to have panic attacks, which are extremely paralyzing. I didn't understand. I knew a relative when I was a child that suffered panic attacks, and I just thought, well, I don't understand what the big deal is. Just relax. And it's a physical thing that happens within your body. You can't control it. And by just relaxing, well, it's no big deal. Just relax. They hit out of nowhere. I might be driving down the freeway, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm going to completely black out. I'd shake uncontrollably. So it affected my ability to drive. I couldn't drive the freeway anymore. I always needed an out. Got to drive the back road so I have an out in case I freak out. I might have to pull over or get off the road. And oh yeah, I should explain agoraphobia in case the actual definition is a type of anxiety disorder in which you fear and avoid places or situations that might cause you to panic and make you feel trapped, helpless, or embarrassed. So that's back to the agoraphobia. So one of the things that I learned how to do, or what, that helped me, was forgiving myself for the guilt that I felt. The guilt that I felt over my brother's trauma, the guilt that I felt over, I made a bad decision moving to this island. I didn't know what was going to happen. It wasn't my fault. So don't blame yourself. Forgive yourself. Don't try to handle it on your own. Talk to your friends. Tell them how you feel. I'm sharing this because I know a lot of you are experiencing things like this. And there is a way out, and you can survive it and get through it. I don't have panic attacks anymore. And that is actually through recovery. That is also through the right medication. If you need professional help, it's available. Seek it out. Look for the right person. for whatever it is that you're having. If you're having panic attacks or anxiety or agoraphobia or any of those things. We all have traumas, and some of them are really, really severe, way more severe than what I've talked about. Don't try to handle it on your own. I've let go of the guilt. I've forgiven myself. I've learned what I needed to learn through going through those experiences. And I can heal that child, and I can separate myself from that now. And I just wanted to share that with you. I don't have all the answers, but I wanted to let you know some of my experiences. And I encourage you to share, comment and tell me what you think, or share some of your experiences, or just your thoughts, and ways that maybe you've healed from your own traumas, and so that we can help each other. And that's really all I have to say on the subject of trauma. As I said, I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't have all the answers. But I think it's important that we share our experiences. I think by sharing our experiences, it helps a lot of other people out there. I feel like a lot of people are suffering in a denial and feeling like they have to handle it themselves, or you're drinking too much, as I used to do, to block it out. And you don't have to do that. So please, I encourage you to share your thoughts. I would love to hear from you.